I don't play bars because it's just pointless. The lyrics are so important to my songs. They don't serve well as background music, and so just I certainly have experienced playing for a room full of people that weren't paying attention a few times in my career, but after doing it once, that was enough. And it taught me to be careful where I book myself, which limits, you know, limits where I can play, but it also ensures that pretty much every time I do play, it's really enjoyable. I never wanted this to feel like a job. Never wanted this to feel like I was slogging my way through something, punching a time clock kind of thing. And it never has. And I always had told myself that if that day ever came when it did start to feel like work, I'd probably do something else to make my living and retain music as something I get joy from. But I've been really lucky. I've been able to have the best of both of those worlds, make a living. First song I ever wrote about baseball was Lefty, and it was based on Steve Carlton. I may have taken a liberty or two with the storyline. But the funny thing is, I was too shy to play that song for anybody. It was years after I wrote it that I ever played it. I just assumed for some strange reason that people would find a song about baseball trite. And so I had the song in my back pocket for 6 or 7 years after I wrote it. And one night I was sitting around a campfire at a folk festival that I was performing at after hours. A bunch of songwriters sitting together swapping songs, and I just pulled that one out. And people reacted to it in a way that shocked me. And I tried it out in a show soon after, and I got the same reaction from the audience. This was entirely unexpected. So I started to include it in my set list on a regular basis.
Lefty's in the minors, got his shoulder packed in ice, and he's trying to hang on there against all that good advice. He used to throw that sinker, but that sinker ball went south. Then they started calling him for going to his mouth. Lefty holds the record for most strikeouts in a game. Once upon a time, he really threw a ball of flame. Some wish he'd gone gracefully when his time finally came. And they put Lefty on waivers, nobody laid a claim. And it's a God almighty shame he got too old to play the game. Well, he made himself a name, and they call him Lefty.
So there's so many incredible stories in baseball's history. It's got the most wonderful folklore, and it also has some really phenomenal American values, not even American values, just human values, like parent-child relationships shared through baseball. My dad was always a big baseball fan and played in high school and played in the Army. That was his job in the Army, playing ball. And he would tour bases in Korea playing ball. And he would take me to Connie Mack Stadium, the old stadium in Philadelphia that's no longer there. And we would go frequently. And even to this day, we're still very much diehard Phillies fans together. The aunt that I mentioned was very musical, played the piano and played the guitar, and she was very encouraging when I was very little. I started taking piano lessons when I was 5, and I was given a Bob Dylan album when I was 7 or 8 years old, and it just grabbed me. I didn't understand anything about what he was writing and singing about, but I can remember one side in particular of Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits Volume 2, the side with Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues again, I would fall asleep every night listening to that record.
Do you play that song? Is that in your repertoire?
It's not, but funny enough, I learned it years ago and used to busk with it on the street. I only really play my own songs now.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to a school called Haverford School, which is in suburban Philadelphia, and it was a private school. I went through the Lower Merion School District through the 8th grade, and then was an underachiever. And my parents thought if they sent me to a private school, it might help bring out a little bit more
Personality.
So I can remember liking bands such as The Outlaws and Yes, Leonard Skinner, Jethro Tull, Jefferson Starships, and the very first time I had been invited to do a concert at the Hall of Fame. It was on a Super Bowl Sunday, very cold day in January, and while I was there, Tim mentioned to me that Dick Allen happened to be in Cooperstown too. He, at the time, was working for the Phillies in public relations, community relations, which I thought was ironic. And Tim mentioned that he probably would be staying at the Otesaga Hotel. So at his suggestion, I drove over there thinking maybe I could leave a copy of the CD with the song on it at the front desk. When I walked in the lobby, to my amazement, there was Dick Allen having a conversation with somebody, but right there in the lobby. And I just parked myself off to the side and waited for them to finish, and then I walked over and introduced myself to him, told him I'd grown up in Philadelphia and he was my favorite player of all time, and I told him I'd written this song.
Me and you, we never booed Richie Allen. Never understood why people did. He had a homer every time he stepped up to the plate. That's what I remember as a kid. Richie in the field out there by first base, the target of some mighty foul words. With his shoes he'd scrawl between the pitches, oh, great big letters in the dirt. Philly fans, they've been known to get nasty. When Joe must go, they'll run him out of town. I've seen Santa get hit by a snowball and then get hit again when he was down.
Handed him the CD from my coat pocket, and he took it in both of his hands, and he was kind of looking at it and looking at me and back at it, and sizing me up a little bit.
Looking down, I'm sure.
Looking down at the
Yeah.
CD, looking up at me,
Yeah.
and, back and forth, kind of sizing me up. What's this all about? Some guy walking up to me out of the blue like this and giving me a CD and saying he's written a song about me. But it dawned on me right then and there that it would be really cool to show him this photograph that we had composed and put on the back of the CD booklet of the word boo written in the dirt. And so I asked for the CD back, and I took the shrink wrap off. I pulled out the booklet and showed him, and I was hoping I could get a little reaction from him. And I wasn't at all prepared for the tear that I saw roll down his cheek, which, as you might imagine, meant the world to me. This was my hero, and I had just touched him in a way that I didn't expect to. So that was one of the all-time great moments in my
house
life.
as a kid. That's a great story. Thank you.
We had a great album by the Limelighters, a children's album called Through Children's Eyes. And my mother would play it in the house. My aunt would play it when I would go and stay with her and my grandparents. And there was a song called The Lollipop Tree, which I just loved. I would dance to as a toddler. And amazingly, fast forward 30 some years later, I was playing a music festival on Vancouver Island, and the Limelighters were on the bill. Two of the original members were still alive, and I went up to one of them backstage and I told him that it was because of their music that I first fell in love with music. And in particular, it was the song The Lollipop Tree that really got me. I told him how I used to dance to it as a toddler. And he saw somebody walking past with a guitar on their back, and he stopped them. And he said, "Excuse me, can I borrow your guitar for a second?" And he sang me The Lollipop Tree right then and there to existence. I was drawn to a place called the Main Point in Bryn Mawr, which was a folk club, held maybe 180 people or so. But they had all sorts of acts. The most amazing lineup. People like Jackson Browne and Bruce Springsteen and Bonnie Raitt and even the Talking Heads and Little Feat, and just an unbelievable lineup went through there over the years. I think first and foremost, the sharing, the passing of the torch, between parents and their children, passing that love of baseball. When you think about how far back baseball goes and how common an experience it is for virtually every American. For the most part, baseball is a universal thing in America, and the same experiences have been shared by virtually everybody. The idea of going to a game with family and eating crap food and getting souvenirs and maybe chasing a foul ball or getting an autograph.
It's kind of like going to a concert. You participate.
Yeah, yeah. And the heroes that we've had through the years. Then there are some. I like the Beatles. I don't think I've ever loved the Beatles, but I love the Stones. I like the down and dirty rock and roll. I like the fact that they were bad boys.
Clearly.
First two concerts I went to, I was 5 years old. Saw the Jackson 5, and I saw the Osmond Brothers. Marie wasn't even part of the show.
Same stage?
Probably not on the same evening, but my grandparents took me to both of those concerts. The first concert I ever went to as a teenager was a Jefferson Star show. It was probably 77.
And where?
76. It was at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. There's one that I came across in a drawer at the Baseball Hall of Fame in the research department. It was a old cassette tape, and I popped it into a player, and it was a song called "The Secret of Life According to Satchel Paige" by a Canadian singer-songwriter named Bob Bosson. And that might still to this day be my favorite baseball song that I've ever heard that wasn't my own. Dan Byrne writes some really great baseball songs. John McCutcheon writes some good baseball songs. Steve Goodman's Dying Cubs Fan's Last Request. I mean, that right there is...
By the shores of old Lake Michigan, where the hawk wind blows so cold, an old Cub fan lay dying in his midnight hour that tolled. All around his bed his friends had gathered. They knew his time was short, and up on his head they put a bright blue cap from his all-time favorite sport. And he said, "It's late, it's getting dark in here, and I know it's time to go. But before I leave the lineup, there's just one thing I'd like to know. Do they still play the blues in Chicago when baseball season rolls around? When the snow melts away Do the Cubbies still play in their ivy-covered burial ground? When I was a boy, they were my pride and joy, but now they only bring fatigue to the home of the brave, the land of the free, and the doormat of the National
Another
League.
one would be a song called The Man Who Blew Kisses, and that's about a developmentally disabled man who was in the audience at a folk festival in Nova Scotia, and he was literally blowing kisses at me while I was on stage. And when I realized that he had a developmental disability, I started to blow kisses back to him between songs when my hands were free. And I knew in that moment that I needed to write this song as soon as I got home, and I did. So that's a special one for me. I got the idea that I wanted to write a song about Jackie Robinson, and I went down to the Borders bookstore in Villanova, Pennsylvania, which doesn't exist anymore, but it's near where my parents live.
Go Cats.
And I found a book on Jackie Robinson. I started to thumb through it, and I landed on a page where there was one paragraph about a man by the name of Eddie Klepp, and it said Eddie Klepp was the first white man to play in the Negro Leagues, and that's all it said about him. And this predated the internet and Google. So it's an interesting story. I mentioned this to my father, and he said, you ought to call the Baseball Hall of Fame, see if anybody there might know anything more about him. So I called the Baseball Hall of Fame. I got the receptionist answered, and I just started in on hi, my name is, and the singer-songwriter, and I'm wondering if you might know anything about a fella named Eddie Klepp. And the receptionist said, hang on a second, I'll put you through to the research department. Well, I had no idea there was even such a thing as a research department. And the fella who answered that call in the research department was a man by the name of Tim Wiles. Tim was the director of research there. And I asked him, have you ever heard of a man by the name of Eddie Klepp? And Tim replied, no. Who was he? So I thought, oh well, I'm out of luck here. But I told him all that I knew. He was the first white man to ever play in the Negro Leagues. And Tim said, that sounds like it would be a great idea for a poem or a song. And I said, it's funny you should say that, because I'm a songwriter and I was hoping to write a song about this. So Tim said, let me take your number and I'll look through our files, and if I find anything, I'll call you back. And an hour later, Tim called me back and said, you're in luck. I found a couple of articles. I'll Xerox them for you and I'll send them your way. So that was the very first baseball song that I ever wrote that required research and where I was historically accurate. And I then came to learn about an organization called SABRE, the Society for American Baseball Research, and I'm also a member. And I realized that if I was going to write historical songs, I had better do my research and be factually correct, because this is something baseball scholars would rip me apart about, and I never wanted that to happen. So that led to an amazing friendship with Tim Wiles at the Hall of Fame. For at least my first 8 or 9 baseball songs, Tim was my go-to guy for background information, and there were some songs where he literally Xeroxed me 100 different pages and mailed them to me at the Hall of Fame's expense. And these were integral to my earliest songs. Then there came a point where Google came into existence and a lot of information was put online, and I didn't need